Castañeda Gill, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Social Cipher. So do you see this ring on my finger? It actually serves a purpose. It has these 3 little rings that I spin, and it's especially handy when I'm anxious or when I'm surrounded by a flurry of thoughts or feelings or external stimuli that I can't control. It gives me this stable rhythm in a world and a life that rarely harmonizes. In the autistic community, we call that stimming. It's a way to gain control and comfort in situations where we might feel like there isn't much. And the cool part about it is that every autistic person might have a totally different and wonderful way of doing that. When I was diagnosed with autism and ADD as a teenager, I had a hard time accepting that. The fact that I was so impacted by stimuli that would never bother my friends, and that I had to do so much work to do things differently just so that I'd feel okay. And what was even harder was to understand the incredibly different way that I learn. It seemed like all of my peers had this manual to working through the social world and being a normal human. Mine was nowhere to be found, and for too long, I blamed myself. I believed that I was the problem. I thought that the only way to survive was to play the part of someone else, someone normal who learned in the normal ways, especially someone who didn't need other people around. I closed myself off to people, because if I did that, I would totally lessen my chance of failing, and no one would ever know, right? Spoiler, I was not right. I fell into years of anxiety and depression and low self-esteem. Inside, I still felt like I was absolutely broken. What really got to me were my passions. I loved art, I loved music, and I loved stories. Those were the only places where I never let myself stop feeling. And over time, with some help from my family, I realized that those were also the only places that I never stopped learning. I started to hear, see, and understand myself and the social world around me in movies and sweeping soundtracks and art. I could map social situations and emotions I had to scores from a movie. I could feel the expressions in the strokes of a painting. I could place myself in the shoes of a character in a book and absolutely run with it. And it wasn't until years later that I realized I never needed a manual to understand the thoughts and feelings of myself and those around me. The manual, my manual, was hidden in the things that I absolutely loved. Ever since then, I've been determined to help people embrace who they are and how they learn, especially neurodivergent people like me. That's also why right out of college, I teamed up with 4 of the brightest, most talented friends to start a game company. Our company, Social Cipher, creates video games that drive neurodiverse inclusion, empowerment, and social emotional learning. Now, you might be asking, why games? Well, according to the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, it's been shown that autistic youth are almost twice as likely to play video games compared to the neurotypical population. And we hypothesize that that's for 2 reasons. One is that game elements like objectives and level structures align great with autistic traits and with comfort and control and repetition and routine. But the deeper reason, I believe, is that games are a way to experience social interaction and without fear of rejection. Now, we keep seeing this with all of our amazing educators and counselors that we've worked with. Mental health professionals like our team member Chris uses popular games in brilliant ways to connect with his clients. He's been known to use co-op side scrollers to teach young people about collaboration, card games for connection and nonverbal cues, and mindfulness through games like Tetris. Counselors and educators like him are already using games as life hacks, extracting meaning from them to help their youth reach social emotional understanding through the things that they care about. In the same token, autistic people like me naturally extract meaning from stories that speak to us. And though that's starting to get better, I can only extract bits and pieces of who I was from the screen and the pages. I never actually saw or learned about anyone who thought like me. So our team thought, well, why don't we take these 2 ideas further? What if we could make something that was actually for and by autistic people? Something that could make them feel truly seen and understood while helping their supporters better understand and connect with them. Something that no one would have to extract the meaning from because it was all already there. And our game Ava has a goal of doing just that. Ava is a role-playing platform adventure that follows an autistic star mapper as she works through social challenges with space pirates, battles her self-doubt, and finds community. Funnily enough, my journey and the journey of my incredible team in navigating game development is a pretty similar one to Ava's, minus the whole being in outer space part. Looking back on the past few years of Ava's development, my team and I have learned a thing or two about developing games for audiences that are typically overlooked and underrepresented, and I'm excited to share those lessons with you today. So as I mentioned before, I'm an autistic founder. I'm running a startup that builds games for autistic youth. In essence, I am my own target user, but that doesn't make it easy. In fact, it requires developing this unbelievable amount of compassion and understanding for your past self. It demands an exploration and a thorough investigation of many of the most difficult parts of my past. Doing this was incredibly difficult, and quite honestly, it still is. But it's helped me learn how important it is to wholeheartedly empathize with your players. And that brings me to my first lesson in designing for neurodivergent youth. If you want to represent autistic folks, you need to listen to them. And by listening, I don't mean watching some shows, talking to some parents, and maybe reading a few articles. I mean having continuing conversations with autistic people, involving them in various aspects of design, and bringing them onto your team. Even as an autistic person, I knew that I couldn't be the single voice of millions of people who share my condition. When you know one autistic person, you know precisely one, which means that there's a huge variety of autistic experiences that one can have. And that should be exciting. That means there's a multitude of different possibilities in how you might connect with a player. For example, this is a screenshot of Ava's shutdown sequence. In a more traditional game, this might be called a death sequence and happens when you run out of health. But that's not totally relatable to autistic people in real life. We wanted to understand what would truly resonate as an energy drain. We interviewed autistic people, we worked with our amazing neurodiversity consultants, and even when I was in situations that I felt drained my health, I'd pull out a notebook to quickly jot down how I was feeling. And that feeling was this. It's the stress and the noise and stimuli of the outside world coming at you from all angles and making it incredibly hard to process. And our brilliant animator brought those feelings to life. When I first saw this sequence, I could feel exactly how Ava felt. When we worked with our neurodivergent playtesters, you'd see it, their eyes widen, and they'd say, "Oh, that's exactly how I felt before." And that's the moment that we knew we got it right. For our health meter, we did something similar. We asked autistic people what made them feel better in situations of sensory overload. We talked to counselors about real-life ways that they've helped clients process overwhelming emotions. And that's how we came up with quiet spaces. These are scattered throughout our game, and when Ava encounters something like an unpleasant billow of smoke or a crowd that's a little too loud, she'll lose mental fortitude, which is represented by those little balls of light in the corner. Her facial expressions change to reflect that energy drain, and in order to help our players better identify signs that they might be feeling that same drain. When they approach a quiet space, though, Ava pops into a bubble with her furry companion Pud and engages in a special interest that she loves, something that makes her feel safe and in control, much like the stimming that I talked about earlier. And for her, that's writing star maps. We wouldn't have learned any of this if we had assumed and generalized about one autistic experience. For neurodivergent folks, extreme attention to detail is one of our greatest strengths. So this is a great opportunity to play that up. The magic for us is truly in those details, and believe me, we will notice them. Another thing that we notice quite well is when a story resonates with us. And that brings me to another principle we learned in developing Ava. Let the story speak for itself and let your players fail. When we were first building Ava, I thought that creating a framework of different social emotional skills first, and then building a story around it was the right way to go. But then my co-founders came to me with a question. When you learned about social interaction, what was it that actually taught you? It reminded me that I never learned through concepts or categories. I learned through stories about how I affected others and how they affected me. In my experience building a social impact game, especially in the earliest stages, It can be easy to think more about player outcomes than the journey a player has to take to get to them. But it's that engagement, it's that care that you put in the craft that makes her journey worth taking for a player. Like my co-founder Lucy once so brilliantly said, for us, it's not about creating a textbook, it's about crafting a novel. So we brought on two wonderful writers who have done an amazing job collaborating with our neurodiversity consultants to create these nuanced characters with struggles and flaws of their own. It was truly about creating stories about things like stolen compasses and secret robot crushes, and then weaving the social emotional skills through our dialogue choices. We believe that those skills emphasized and strengthened by the player's ability to fail in their interactions with various characters in the game. In our first episode, for example, Ava's mission is to scope out pirates for her captain's ragtag crew, and she chooses whether or not to recruit each one she encounters. One of those characters is the ramen bot, who is known to make some of the best ramen in the galaxy. He's also got a big old crush on a lovely robot that he knows, and looks to Ava for some help in the romance department. Now, we gave Ava the option to ingratiate the robot by claiming that she's an absolute expert on love. Is that the truth? Not in the least. But there is this delicate balance between recruiting this pirate onto your crew and being honest, so that might feel like a valid choice. So to continue appealing to the robot, the player can actually dig themselves into an even deeper hole. But even at that point, just like in life, Ava can go back, be honest, and apologize. Even though this story is kind of silly, it's engaging, it's relatable, and it gives our players a secure space to fail and to learn how to work things out for themselves. If I had more time, I would tell you about how our platforming contributes to that skill building, how my co-founder Charlie has been the mastermind behind our gameplay, relentlessly working towards a balance between empowerment and challenge and fun. But that all truly deserves an entire talk to itself. Every day, we're getting better at understanding how games like these can have an impact on autistic youth and the educators and counselors who work with them. Every day, I'm learning about who I was and what I needed when I was the same age as our players. And for us, Ava is just the beginning. We want to become the global leaders in neurodiverse educational gaming, to give young people everywhere the power to build social emotional skills through play. Right now, we're developing interfaces that allow educators and counselors to watch their students play Ava remotely and discuss their interactions with characters in the game. And in these times, we believe that those shared experiences are more important than ever. We imagine future episodes and products helping neurodivergent people as they enter the workforce and beyond, venturing across the autism spectrum and even providing game-based social emotional learning for the general population. We imagine utilizing AI in-game to gain a better understanding of communities that are typically underrepresented in autism research. There is so much potential for this and more when it comes to understanding and building on this undeniable power of games in the lives of autistic youth. But for that to happen, there needs to be more investment in the neurodivergent community. There needs to be more collaboration and listening to neurodivergent people. There needs to be more support for autistic youth, especially in their mental health and education, so that they can one day grow into neurodivergent founders, innovators, and game changers that we will invest in. And that is how we create products that truly uplift and make a difference in the lives of neurodivergent people. If you'd like to learn more about Ava, how you can invest in neurodivergent communities, or even how you can invest in us because we are fundraising, I'll be answering questions in the Resilience Q&A room. Thank you.